Ahlan wa sahlan, shalom from Jerusalem. This is our Middle East. Al-Shalq al-Asad lana. Our Middle East, Jews and Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Sunni, Shia, Turkomans, Baluchis, Druze, everyone in this very complex and complicated region. Today we're going to talk about, is Washington turning its back on the Middle East, tempting the Iranian regime with billions of dollars in order to come to some sort of accommodation with the United States, while the IRGC is burning up with terror in Jenin over Tel Aviv. We've got a lot to talk about. Join us. Very honored to have a dear friend and colleague, probably the best-known professional Jewish expert in the world, Malcolm Hoenlein. You started out with us in Our Middle East many, many months ago, and we first started the program, and here you are back in Israel for all kinds of reasons, public and private. Malcolm, the Iranian regime issue is burning. I mean, the Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke at the 4th of July event at the American Embassy, and immediately turns to the fact that Jenin has been infiltrated by the IRGC essentially, and is working with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Hamas, both of which are proxies of the Iranian regime. This is a dangerous moment. The real question that we talked about in the open here: where is the United States?
So first of all, it's good to be with you again, and this wonderful podcast of yours that reaches so many people and is so vital in giving information from a different perspective than most people get, and to get the insights that are so valuable in this complex time when the issues you raise can't be easily addressed because each one has ramifications so far beyond, let's say, Jenin, an isolated area, not of great significance globally, yet it's headlines every day. But it's, as you pointed out, this is a war against Iran. When Israel goes in to fight terrorism there, it's not to take territory, it's not to gain anything, it's to fight Iran-backed terrorism. And when you're fighting Iran-backed terrorism, you're talking about Iraq, you're talking about Syria, you're talking about Lebanon, you're talking about Gaza, you're talking about the Houthis in Yemen, this attempt to encircle Israel. So for Israel, these are existential issues, and the world treats it as if it's some sort of a minor threat to Israel's existence, warning them that they, about violations. And instead of saying that Israel's obligation is to address these issues, its first responsibility to its citizens, that you can't have 4, 5, 6 people killed every month coming out of the terror operations, which are being exposed now in Jenin as we talk. So I think, we have to look at the issue of Iran in its global perspective. The advances Iran made with the deal with Saudi Arabia, which I'm sure we'll talk about, China, etc. But part of what drives these developments is a perception that America has withdrawn from the region or is less committed to the region. Yet CENTCOM has done an amazing job. The joint exercises, Juniper Copra, Juniper Oak, all these things are really historic and remarkable when Israel and the United States and 10 other countries, or just Israel and the United States with 6,000 Marines and Israeli troops together. An aircraft carrier comes here, a B-52 bomber, and flying together, doing joint exercise with Israel. That does not make headlines, but it underscores that what we're talking about are common interests. This is not America intervening on behalf of Israel. This is America protecting its vital interests, one of which is Israel, and Israel's vital interests, one of which is American security, America's role in the region. So every layer has multiple layers within it and multiple issues. I think that when an aircraft carrier gets withdrawn from the region for repair, the perception is America's commitment is diminished. Unfortunately, I think there have been mistakes by America in the messages that it sent. When the UAE, 2 ships of the UAE got attacked by Iran with drones and missiles, the United States did not respond. They did later with a subsequent attack. But UAE's reaction is, why are we in a naval coalition with the United States if they're not there for us? And they pulled out. And yet they are participating in an Iranian-led coalition in the northern Persian Gulf. They think they can rely on Iran. They know full well the threat Iran poses to them and their existence. And yet you have countries, including India, joining in that naval coalition. In the Middle East, people do things based on perception, not necessarily on reality. And, I guess it's true of human nature, but it's particularly true here because there are different senses of cognitive dissonance and other things, which are culturally rooted. And so they look at this and they see United States interested in South China, diverting resources, the Ukraine, depleting the stockpiles here in Israel and elsewhere to provide to the Ukrainians, which is fine, but it's the messages that all of this, and if you don't replenish it, if you don't maintain the visual aspects of commitment, and then the negotiations with Iran, they further say, you see that the United States hasn't learned the lessons of the JCPOA. They see Iran enriching, they violate every agreement, and yet we continue to try to work out a deal, a lesser deal, a smaller deal. They don't call it a deal. They don't want anything that's called an agreement because they don't want Congress involved. So, if you're sitting in an Arab leader's seat, you have to look at it at how they perceive it. I don't believe that the President Biden or Mr. Sullivan or even State are not interested in the Middle East. They all know it's important, the oil, the increased involvement of Russia, China, et cetera. But we're sending the wrong signals too often to the region. And there has to be a re-engagement, political re-engagement, invitations. I think it's simply inexcusable that Prime Minister Netanyahu has not been invited to Washington. This is not something you use as a political toy.
This is a very dangerous development. I just want to jump in here, and we've said this on a former podcast. This is a very important point you're making here. We see this as a very, very dangerous development from a perceptual point of view, especially because the Middle East, as you said very well, works on perception that America's strongest ally, most loyal friend, has not been invited to the White House because the perception that it sent, the sense that it sends to Iran, the Iranian regime, and to Middle Eastern, Arab Middle Eastern states is that America has basically abandoned this Israeli government, and then that all hell breaks loose when that perception is out there. It encourages Iran to be far more confident in enriching uranium. Well beyond 60% is where they are right now. It makes them very aggressive in the Arab Gulf.
And the release of funds of $20 million.
$20 billion of funds that will go
potentially $20 billion, but
up to
already
20 billion.
2.7 that went from Iraq to them. And we know that cash is just the fuel of terrorism. The money's not going to help the Iranian people. Their economy is in ruins. 40% of the economy controlled by the supreme leader and the IRGC. So you're absolutely right. The release of any funds we know goes to support their terrorist activities. A country that's selling everyday ammunition to Russia to fight in Ukraine, drones to the Russians, increasing their reliance and the relationship with them. I mean, everything that goes against America's national interests. And to say we're going to accept 60% enrichment when the JCPOA said 3.5%, way beyond the amounts that they're supposed to have. I mean, they're violating every principle, let alone their support in undermining virtually every American ally in the region, challenging Azerbaijan, challenging any other country, including Saudi Arabia. And despite some of the developments, which we can talk about, the fundamentals remain the same. Their aggressive behavior, their support for terrorism, their alliance with the enemies of the United States. And we cannot send mixed signals because then they say, if America can deal with them, then we have to. So they renew diplomatic relations. They say we're not going to be left out in the cold.
Without mentioning any names, Malcolm, you and I heard a former very senior official of the Iranian government say that the Obama administration and the Biden administration are completely misreading the reality on the ground across Iran. The Arab, Israel and the United States Arab partners from Saudi to Bahrain to the UAE are saying the same thing, that the Obama administration and the Biden administration have completely misread the region. And by the way, Israel is saying the same thing while trying to be, very familial about it and keep its deep friendship with the United States. How do we understand that the United States government, in the eyes of really leaders of the Iranian opposition, in the eyes of the Arab leadership, and in the eyes of Israel, are completely misreading reality?
There's only one message that Ayatollahs understand, and that's strength. They probe for weakness. That's what all dictators do all the time. And where they find weakness, they exploit it. If they find resistance and strength, they move on to another thing. And too often the United States is not sending the message of resoluteness, although they are doing many things and they are supportive in many respects. And as I said, CENTCOM's operations is an example. But when we look at America's own border, and we see an hour and a half from Florida, a continent that is being taken over by Iran.
Latin America, Central and South America.
Latin America, South America, Central America, from Chile's last election, Bolsonaro's ouster, Colombia, Costa Rica, and let alone all the Bolivarian states led by Venezuela and Bolivia, Ecuador, all of them, Iran is operating. Chinese are in there, the Russians are in there, but mostly it's Iran that is Hezbollah bases all over. So Iran is not going to fight us from 8,000 miles away. They learned the lesson. They can fight us from an hour and a half off our coast. Aside from the economic exploitation, this physical security that they go in American shipping lanes, that they send 2 tin boats, military craft through the Panama Canal, and we didn't stop them. What is the message to the countries in South America? What's the message to our allies? That we let them transnavigate the whole world back to Oman after stopping in Rio de Janeiro, maybe Venezuela. All this projects an image that we are not resolute, or that there's weakness, or that they can get away with it. And they're brilliant in exploiting it. They're not brilliant in running the country. The country's in collapse. The people don't want this regime. The people of Iran, I think, are much more pro-American and pro-Israel, by the way. And they keep demonstrating that in different ways. And as you said, the person we spoke to talked about the opportunities right now. And we have to just send messages of support. I do think the administration showed support to the women and, made statements. But it has to be a sustained effort to say, we don't interfere. But when there are people who are putting their lives on the line for democracy, for their rights, why aren't we speaking out? Why aren't we? We're so quick to criticize some of our allies, and especially Israel. And, you see the warnings that come. And also the administration, they have to be careful sometimes with statements that between friends can be made, but have to be made privately. Once you go publicly, the enemies of both countries exploit it. It was something I told President Obama that got a life of its own afterwards in our first meeting, that the lesson of history is there shouldn't be public daylight between Israel and the United States, because the enemies of both countries will exploit it. There will be differences. It doesn't mean you can't ever criticize, but you have to be very careful about how you say it. Basically, America and Israel are in the same line, and they remain it. They still remain the best allies they have, the most reliable ally. But many of the countries in the region say, look, we have only one permanent aircraft carrier here, and that's Israel. There's only one country we can really rely on, and you heard it.
That's
today.
what Iranian officials are saying as well. I mean, former Iranian officials are saying as well. We can rely on Israel.
And you hear it from the Iranian people, where after Reza Pahlavi's visit to Israel, the son of the Shah, in stadia at football games on that following Saturday in 6-7 places, thousands of people yelled, death to the dictator, long live Reza, death to the Palestinians, long live Israel. I mean, it's ridiculous that we don't understand the dynamic and how we can exploit it. America is not an agent of regime change. The people are the agent, but we should be empowering them. We should be helping them. We don't want another war for America in the region, but I don't think it's necessary. All the ingredients are there. The economy is in collapse. The country has half the country is in a drought. The toman is worth almost nothing. But people are willing to sacrifice if they know that it'll bring about a change in their lives. They don't want this restrictive regime anymore. And more, the leaders are beginning to understand it. And you heard some of that today from that leader who indicated what is going on, even in high levels of government, where they're disaffected or they realize the long-term challenge that they face.
It's interesting, Malcolm, the particular individual that you're speaking about today, who is really deeply knowledgeable about the Iranian regime, said this moment reminds me of the 1980s and the Soviet regime in its final years. Right. And it seems to me, as an observer and a student of the Middle East, that America had much more political will and moral clarity. Certainly under the Reagan administration in the 1980s, they had no fewer than 12 civilian intelligence offices dealing in influence operations, dealing in issues of regime change, dealing in all kinds of information operations and influence in order to help the Russian people take more control over their own future. And this particular individual today, a former official, former senior Iranian person, he said, this is what it reminds me of, but it right away hit me. I don't see America with the same moral and strategic clarity as they had 35 years ago when you were very active in the Soviet Jewry movement as a leader.
That was more than 35 years ago, but
that was the late 80s.
The late 80s
is when they were collapsing.
Yeah, I'm saying we were very active.
Yeah, no,
many
for years
before.
before.
But there is a lesson there that Russian Jews put their lives on the line and took on a prison that spanned 2 continents. They made perestroika possible. They made glasnost possible by their heroism, and a small handful of people can make a difference. And the same thing is true today. When we look at the situation of the women in Iran, putting their lives on the line, thousands arrested. Where's the worldwide protest? Where's the support for them? Where's the declarations that we're not going to trade, we're not going to deal with you until these kids under 16, to see the end of hundreds and hundreds of executions, more than any other country in the world? Where are the protests that gays and priests can be hung from the top of cranes? It's not hidden. It's open. And today we just heard that one of the leading civil rights advocates is likely facing execution this week. Where is the moral outrage that they visit? If Israel does something within international law to defend its citizens against terrorism, all of a sudden we find the United Nations condemning it, all the resolutions against it. They appoint a commission of inquiry without limit, with an unlimited budget, no time limit, which has only one purpose, and that's to condemn Israel, issues a report that is completely without foundation, that you have 7 resolutions in the Human Rights Council, not against Iran, not against Syria, not against the violators, but automatically against Israel. So you see a complete distortion of the value system. And if they see that, and they see they can get away with it, and you just keep condemning and isolating Israel, this is an attack on the United States. It's just easier to attack the small Satan, Israel, than America, which is so much more powerful. But it is fundamentally against America. It's against the principles, against democracy. It's against all the values that we share in common. And the world is sacrificing these things rather than standing up. And the people of Iran are so heroic, and they're doing heroic things if they would only get the resonance outside. And then the message goes to the Saudis, you know what, we're not going to be isolated. So they say, we'll make deals with China, we'll make deals because multilateralism, multinationalism. But who do they want a security agreement with? With China? With Russia? No, they want it with the United States. So all this is to pressure the United States to make a deal. And then they say, we'll talk to Israel. And the same thing, the UAE, they're sending messages. Do any of them think that any of these other things, that they can trust Iran, that the Sunni-Shiite divide is disappearing, that Iran's designs on Mecca and Medina and against the government of Saudi Arabia or against UAE have diminished in any way? No. But they're saying we're going to hedge our bets, we're going to send messages, and they think that perhaps that will stimulate a different response.
Yeah, I think you made a very important point here. Hedging your bet is the headline here. This is what our friends in the Gulf, and you've been there and I've been there, that's what they say to us privately. We're hedging our bet. We want to reduce the flames. Now, in Washington, if you talk to administration officials, they'll basically say that the Saudis want to see an Israeli-Palestinian reconciliation. They're saying that's what this Saudi-Iranian deal was about, is that they, first of all, they want to engage Israel, the normalization, only after a Palestinian-Israeli deal. Well, they're not saying that. They're saying we want security guarantees from the United States government. And in fact, Saudi officials said publicly recently, I don't know who's listening, that the more that Mohammed bin Salman and in the kingdom receives ironclad commitments for its own defense from the United States, the less they're interested in resolving in the final resolution of the Palestinian issue. They said it very clearly. But what concerns many Israelis, and I think I'm not going beyond to say it concerns the prime minister and those around him, is by trotting out Israel and the Palestinian issue as the central stage to play out this very dangerous regional drama. is a fundamental mistake and misreading of the Middle East as it is today.
Most Arab leaders tell us today that their comments about the Palestinians is they have no leadership. Abbas doesn't have the confidence of his people. They call it a kleptocracy. They say we're tired of investing tens of billions of dollars without any benefit to the people. And I think the Palestinian people feel the same. And look at the polls: 80% don't support Abbas. The young people don't support the regime. They feel alienated from it. And others take advantage. Hamas, Hezbollah, often as agents of Iran, then infiltrate and they mobilize and they offer simple solutions using Islamist extremist messages and politically extremist messages to mobilize and to
social network
themselves.
Social network poison.
And the thing that catalyzes a lot of it is, in fact, the existence of the internet, which enables people to spread a big lie that it took Hitler months to do. They do in nanoseconds. But I think you've said important things about what the fundamental nature of the relationships is. Look, everybody wants to see the Palestinian-Israeli issue resolved. Whether it's 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, 5 states, only the parties can work that out. You can't impose a solution, but we can help bring about conditions. I think the leaders of most of the countries see this as an obstacle, because they know their street can be mobilized or others can be mobilized, they say it. But fundamentally, most of them tell them the people don't care. They want their issues resolved, their economic interests, and don't want to see us pouring more money into the bottomless pit of Gaza or the PA. So I think there has to be a demand for accountability from the PA. We have to stop pay to slay, which is outrageous that $300 million goes to paying people to kill Israelis.
That's official PA budget line, by the way. It has nothing to do with Social Security.
And when they lose the money, when the money is taken away, they don't care. So they don't care about the people. This is all, supporting terrorism and sending that message, which is not communicated to people around the world and through the media.
Washington knows very well, by the way. Here's the ultimate irony. As we speak in this podcast, the IDF is working in the Jenin refugee camp against IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, being sent at the direct behest of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and those who are killed in firefights with the IDF will receive lifetime pensions from the very PA that they're trying to overthrow at the behest of Iran's Supreme Leader.
If they go to jail, they get a salary 3 times what a Palestinian policeman gets. So what's the message that they send? You extol, you martyrize the people who engage in terrorist activities, killers. I mean, can you imagine if in the United States, when we have these mass killings, that those people would be honored and their families being given pensions and they would have streets named for them and schools named for them? Nobody would tolerate it for a minute. And yet here we see that that no matter what the cost is to the people, that they cut off funds that equivalent to the amount that is spent on this, they continue to do it. So it tells you what are the priorities of the PA leadership, at least. And I think the Palestinian people want to have a decent life. I mean, people basically don't want to stay in this stateless condition. But just let's remember, there were no universities when Israel came into the West Bank in 1967. It was occupied by Jordan for 20 years. Nobody made Jerusalem the capital. Nobody ever visited there. All of a sudden, it was when the Jews had control and made it open to everybody that all of a sudden they had these great desires. There were no universities there. They were all established under the, quote, occupation. I'm not saying it's an ideal situation. I'm saying to you that people don't know the history, don't know the context, and come up with simplistic solutions thinking that you can just address it. Let's look at the streets of France, look at the streets in many other places, and then tell us what is the core and where is the violence coming from. We see it in the anti-Semitism in America, the extremists, including from Muslim sources, that Qatar can spend tens of billions of dollars in the United States in anti-Israel and anti-Semitic activities, that you have so many other parties that are engaged in these activities. It's all, and the world has shrunk. It's all internationalized today. There are no borders. The internet has erased everything.
Absolutely, Malcolm. And I think the anti-Semitism point in America, there's a direct through line in the couple of minutes that we have left. There's a through line between the anti-Semitism, both rhetorical anti-Semitism and physical violent anti-Semitic acts. You can trace them back here to the Middle East because the rabid, poisonous Jew hatred and Jewish state hatred that is being promulgated by hundreds of sites, by the PA, by the way, by the PA and so-called Palestinian NGO and the Iranians together is what creates this, what we call collective anti-Semitism in the United States. And if there's an important message here also for the American government, the American people, is that anti-Semitism being played out in the streets of New York is connected to exactly what goes on here in the streets of Tehran, and what the Iranian government is doing in all of communicating all of this Jew hate.
Globalization of Jew hatred.
It is the globalization of Jew hatred. It's something that Israel is center on the target list for this Jew hatred. So one really has to connect, as Jonathan Greenblatt has done, and the ADL is doing. They're connecting now Jew hatred and Jewish state hatred. It is one and the same, and it's being driven by the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And if any of your listeners, viewers, start saying, well, freedom of speech, nobody's restricting freedom of speech. Nobody says you can't criticize a policy of the government of Israel. This is denying Israel's right to exist. It's denying Jews the right to have a national expression like every other people. It's holding Israel not to a higher standard, but to a double standard, an impossible standard. So the World Health Organization condemns one organization, the one that set up a field hospital in Ukraine, in Kenya, went to Syria, risking their lives every day. Not the countries that were destroying, like Syria and Iran and Iraq, destroying hospitals, destroying medical care. The only one they condemned. So it's not because that Israel does something wrong. It's because Israel does something right. It's because what Israel represents and stands for, which is exactly what America stands for. So they are a joint target, and it's very much interrelated. They hate America. They hate Israel because of America. They don't hate America because of Israel. It's because Israel is seen as an ally and a supporter and sharing the values of the United States.
There you go. That statement, as we'll put the exclamation point on this podcast, is the wake-up call for the West. Malcolm Hoenlein, the former executive vice chairman, and the current vice chairman. I can't get all your initials on a towel.
Right.
Of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and really one of the best-known leaders in our generation of the Jewish people. Thank you very much for joining us on Our Middle East. We hope to have you back again very soon.
Always my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Stimulate us.